Today, the Biden Justice Department launched a politically motivated assault on the rule of law and our democracy. Just 3 days ago, a top legislative priority of the Biden administration and their far-left allies was stopped in the United States Senate. S1 would have done away with voter ID across the country, forced taxpayers to fund political campaigns, encourage ballot harvesting, and set up a federal takeover of state elections. S1 is such bad policy that even with united control of Washington, D.C., the Democrats could not ram it through. Because Republicans stood firm, this unconstitutional power grab was thankfully stopped in its tracks. And now, because the American people stood up against their extreme agenda, the Biden administration is weaponizing the Department of Justice to serve their own partisan goals. This administration is ignoring the border crisis. They're ignoring the rising crime across the country, which are both a direct result of their policies. Instead, they're spending their time going after states who took reasonable, common sense steps to ensure the sanctity of the ballot box. Let me be clear. The DOJ lawsuit announced today is legally and constitutionally dead wrong. Their false and baseless accusations are quite honestly disgusting. But I can't say that I'm surprised. The President and his administration, Stacey Abrams, and their far-left allies have lied about the Election Integrity Act from the beginning. Even the mainstream media fact-checkers have called them out multiple times. This is the truth. SB 202 ensures Georgia elections are secure, accessible, and fair. It expands access to early voting, ensures that drop boxes are available in every county and secured around the clock. It implements voter ID for absentee ballots, which nearly every poll shows an overwhelming majority of Americans support. But you know, they don't care about the truth. For Stacey Abrams, the far left, and now sadly, the Department of Justice, it is about forcing their extreme agenda literally on every state in the country. If you remember, they have encouraged boycotts that targeted small businesses still recovering from the pandemic and cost Georgia $100 million in economic impact by moving the Major League Baseball All-Star game. And I said this a few months ago, and sadly it is even more true today. They are coming for you next. They're coming for your state, your ball game, your election laws, your business, and your way of life. If you stand up to the woke mob, if you support election integrity, if you support law enforcement, if you support small business, if you support the Constitution and the rule of law, they are coming to force their agenda on you and your community. And they're not afraid to use the full force of the federal government to do this. But I will tell you right now, we are not backing down. I am not backing down. And I can tell you that Joe Biden, Stacey Abrams, and Merrick Garland don't scare me. When I was Secretary of State, I sued the Obama Justice Department twice and won. I look forward to making it 3 for 3 against the Justice Department to make sure that in Georgia it continues to be easy to vote and hard to cheat, and that we have secure, accessible, and fair elections. With that, I'll open it up for questions. Well, I think you need to look back at history of election law in our state. After most presidential elections and even many general elections, the legislature in the past has always done election cleanup legislation, election reform legislation. I worked on that with the General Assembly when I was Secretary of State. Obviously, I won that race, a couple of them. Did the same thing when I was in the legislature after I'd gotten elected to a state Senate position. I would remind the people across the country and those in the state of Georgia that we had a new voting system this election, so it's certainly pertinent for us to go back and fix issues that we saw with the mechanics of the election. And that's exactly what the General Assembly did today, or did this session, with Senate Bill 202. You know, one of the attorneys in the Justice Department said today that this was done very quickly, and that this bill started out as a 3-page bill and it ended up as a 90-page bill. They obviously, like they didn't take time to read the bill originally, also didn't take time to learn about the process in Georgia that started months before the final bill was signed, with the legislative committee that Speaker of the House David Ralston set up even before the end of the year to start working on this issue. They didn't mention the 50 election bills that were introduced that were consolidated into the final version, or at least parts of them were. They didn't mention that some of the recommendations from the bill came from the County Commissioners Association of Georgia, which represents Republican counties and Democratic counties and their elections officials, because of issues that they had on the ground during the election. That is what the truth is. There is somebody lying to you about SB 202, the Elections Integrity Act that was passed in Georgia, and it is not me. And that is what the people around this country need to know and be warned. They are coming for you next. Oh, not at all. You know, using the Department of Justice in this manner, as sad as it is, it's not unprecedented. It does not surprise me. What should be surprising not only to the citizens of Atlanta, Georgia, and our state, is that they're using the top law enforcement in the land to come after states that want to have secure, accessible, and fair elections, when they should be going after violent crime that we're seeing in our major cities here in Atlanta and all over the country. Also, as I mentioned in our remarks, they're ignoring the border crisis. Thought it was very interesting that the Attorney General's press conference started the same time the Vice President landed at the border, but she wasn't really at the border. I think she was 10 miles from it. Maybe drawing attention away from the crisis, perhaps.
Governor, the audit in Maricopa County is wrapping up. Do you support the full forensic audit in the state of Georgia?
Well, I think from an audit perspective, look, I've said this many times, I've supported the laws that we have in our state and the constitutional powers that we have in our state. We have a legal process right now that's looking at an audit in Fulton County. The judge ruled partially on that yesterday. We're still looking at that ruling to see what the ramifications are. The place for that under current Georgia law would be in the courts. You know, we're obviously watching what's happening around the country, but I would urge people to look at what the law is in your own state, because I'm sure it's a lot different here than it is in Arizona, which is the way the system's designed, and that's exactly what the feds are trying to change right now.
One more question.
Governor, what would you say to black voters in this community who are hearing this and kind of concerned about what's happening in the national and in your state?
Listen, I've reached out to a lot of African Americans and other minority groups, faith leaders and other people about what the truth is in this bill. I've done over 80 interviews about SB 202 in traditional and non-traditional markets, answering every single question. This bill is not voter suppression. My African American friends in the state of Georgia and across the country need to know that I'm not the one lying to you here. The name Jim Crow 2.0, at least the domain name, was reserved by activist groups 3 weeks before the final version of the bill was ever put together. This is a playbook that they have. And if you actually take time, which obviously the Justice Department did not do early on and obviously President Biden still has not done, you will see that this is not suppression. This actually expands access. And I would just refer you to some interesting comparisons. And perhaps the U.S. Attorney General should be going after President Biden's home state of Delaware, where they have no excuse. You have to have an excuse to vote an absentee ballot by mail. You have to have an excuse. In Georgia, you do not. Prior to legislation that just has passed in Delaware, hasn't even been implemented yet, there was no early voting. We are adding a mandatory Saturday in Georgia for early voting, expanding access for weekend voting. We are giving all 159 counties the opportunity to add up to 2 more Sundays, which would create 19 days of early voting. Delaware has 10. New York. There have been many from New York that have criticized our bill. They have 10 days of early voting, and you must have an excuse, unlike Georgia, where anyone can vote early. And we have potentially 19 days. New Jersey, only 9 days of early voting. We have at least 17, potentially 19. Wonder if they'll sue them. Thank you very much.